I really shouldn't wait so long in between uploads. I haven't uploaded a video in quite a long time, but I've decided to get back into making videos again, yet again. And today I've based this video on an old report I did about 2 years ago, and well, I'll let the findings present themselves. Enjoy! In this critique of the artist, sculptor, draftsman and writer Max Beckmann, I shall analyse how his faith, work and life accumulated into him being one of the most respected artists in the 20th century. The First and Second World War, with its cold and bizarre depictions, will play a vital part, and slowly the horrors of war seep into Beckmann's psyche. The subject sincerely enthralls me as I produce work which relates to the style, although it was Beckmann's hesitance for the term expressionist which is interesting, as he preferred to be included in the new objectivity movement. I believe, however, that this was a way to stand out from the rest of the artists, but having seen his work and the influences that moulded his creations, it's fair to say that this was a self-indulgent act. I hope this critique thoroughly educates and entertains anybody who wants to learn of what I consider one of the most important artists in history. The world certainly looked different during the Second Industrial Revolution, which began in 1870. Gardiner S. states that, to quote, "The Industrial Revolution was another of those extraordinary jumps forward in the story of civilization," end quote. And thus we get a glimpse of the majesty to follow. The evolution of technological and manufacturing appliances had grown staggeringly, and perspectives had too. Born to farming parents who moved to the city in Leipzig, Germany, Max was born. The youngest of three, the young Beckmann showed signs of creativity, and it's said that he, quote, often disrupted class by making sketches and passing them amongst the students. In 1903, he attends the Grand Ducal Art School at age 19. It is here he is really immersed in the world of artists, as his influences include Edvard Munch, Paul Cézanne, Henri Rousseau, and Arthur Schopenhauer. While studying, he met Minna Taube, whom would later become his wife. Their relationship was based on the love of art and music. In the March of the following year, he drops out of the university and instead moves to Paris, which is roughly 30 miles away. He's also started to develop a signature. As of 1905, his work is identified with the initials, quote, MBSL or, quote, HBSL, which is revealed to stand for Max Beckmann Scheiner Liebstein and Herr Beckmann Scheiner Liebstein, meaning my beloved. On September 21st, 1906, he marries his university sweetheart Minna Taube. While married to Beckmann, reluctantly she gives up painting, but her heart is still invested in the arts. We can tell from this that she's willing to sacrifice what she deeply loves for the man she too deeply loves. That year they travel to Italy to spend their honeymoon. The painting I'm about to show you is titled Young Men by the Sea, which was painted by a 21-year-old Beckmann in 1905. In this early stage we get a sense of how the artist chooses his medium, and in this surreal image we get a glimpse of the artist's talent. The strong yellows which beautifully blend with the whites and blues is really fantastic. By 1908 he became a father to a young boy named Peter, and his wife took up singing lessons, which unbeknownst to Beckmann will be the ironic end of their marriage. It's 1914 and the First World War has started, and though Beckmann is content with how his life is playing out, he decides it's his next mission in life to sign up. He volunteers as a medical orderly in East Prussia in late autumn. His painting is titled Self-Portrait of a Nurse, which was painted in 1915. By 1915, it's noted that he would continuously write to his wife, recalling the extremities of the war, and even worse, the front row seat, which would also be a trait in his work. Sadly, things would soon come to the worst for Max and Minna's marriage, as in the summer he had a mental breakdown, then in November she publicly performs after accepting an engagement, leaving Beckmann. The painting is titled Night, which was painted in 1918. Imagine what an artist's real vision is when they work on something, but it's clear to me, for in the case of Beckmann's Night, that this is an aftermath of the First World War. The colours which stand out significantly include light and dark blues while mixing a thin green shade. In the composition we see the figures angled in peculiar shapes, and this is where we can see his influence via Cubism. From 1918 to 1924, Beckmann completes his essay Schöpferische Confession, Creative Confession. He writes a play, Das Hotel, produced 90 etchings and lithographs, develops an interest in jazz, has a comedy published by Johann's Press, and in the spring he meets Matilda von Kaulbach, a 21-year-old singer. The following year he proposes to her and they are married in Munich on September the 1st. The final painting is one of his most famous pieces, Self-Portrait in Front of Red Curtain, which was painted in 1927. All in just 20 years we have seen a serious development in his take on the self-portrait. Beckmann had always preferred to use himself as the main subject to paint, and with a new wife and new challenges heading his way, this painting is both stoic and humorous. In this piece we see Beckmann stood in front of a red curtain while he dresses in smart fashion. Dempsey A states that, quote, their figures and portraits combine psychological intensity with a sense of a man's alienation, suffering, and unfortunately for Beckmann, the misery of the First World War is but a sample of the evils to conclude. While living in Sachsenhausen, Frankfurt am Main, with his second wife, Matilda, he strangely meets his ex-wife who lives in Berlin. The next year, in July, he rents a studio in Rue Artois, which is in Paris. Having moved to the city, he doesn't know anybody, but what he lacks in company, he more than makes up for in thirst for success. It's also stated that he regards the painters Picasso and Matisse as rivals. After making a trip to Nice with his wife in 1930, he explains to his wife that he isn't happy. The first painting is titled Self-Portrait with a Saxophone, which was painted in the same year. This painting is titled Departure, which was painted from 1932 to 1935. In 1933, the worst was menacingly approaching Europe in a crimson fog of fascism. After the rise of Hitler's Third Reich, the totalitarian principles gradually burrowed their way into German life to convince the public that decency had been lost due to the German losing the First World War. In this new, quote, modern art was the cause to the decline of what Hitler had planned. Quote, nature as seen by sick minds, and, quote, deliberate sabotage of national defence, were two of many of the phrases used commonly in the exhibitions, while also being crudely represented with horrific graffiti over the work, and in some cases, paintings were crowded intentionally. The following year, the control of art policies is in the hands of the Nazis. From 1935 to 1945, Beckmann makes contacts while attempting to keep to himself. He travels to Paris to meet Ernst Morgenroth to discuss potentially emigrating to America. He moves to Holland with his wife Matilda and her sister for the winter. He travels to London for the quote 20th century German art exhibition, which is a quote protest against the Nazi degenerate art exhibition, and spends the remainder isolated in Holland. In 1947 he leaves for America. In his later years he lived in New York City. On December 27th, 1950, he dies of a heart attack. His final painting is titled, quote, Self-Portrait in Blue Jacket, which was painted in 1950. While living in New York City, Max Beckmann died at the age of 66 of a heart attack. In this section, I would like to contrast and compare an early painting and one he made later in his life. By going through with his history and his life's decisions, it's my intention to show how the world around us can alter the way we perceive things. The first painting is Adam and Eve, which was painted in 1917. The colour grey is the central tone that makes up most of the detail. TAS believes that, quote, Beckmann's shift towards moralising images in which every element, even the colour of the paint, bears deeper meaning. And this is evident from his emotional response from the First World War. The figures shown are thin, pale and nightmare-inducing, and this shows Beckmann's vision of man fallen. The reference to Christian mythology is also crucial in understanding this painting, as we see both Adam and Eve with the talking snake peering around what is presumably the Tree of Knowledge. When Beckmann had a panic attack while being a medical orderly in World War II, I wonder if this experience helped shape a model of what the horrors of war can do to men. The final painting is Beginning, which was painted in 1949. As Beckmann's acclaim grew, so did his visual style, and this is presented in a triptych. The aesthetic of this piece is beautiful. The warm and exciting colours are an improvement from the first painting I showed. However, the theme and expression remain the same, except updated. In each panel there's a story, and since World War II had concluded 4 years earlier, we get an idea that this is a reference to that. It's never clear what Beckmann truly means when he puts oil paint to canvas, but we know from his ideals and his experiences that this is again a scenario of dread he fears could become a reality. In 1942, Apollo was painted on oil. The reason Examine is largely due to the aesthetic, the presentation and the message it sends to the viewer. It's difficult not to see. Beckmann struggled through the colours he uses. This continuous use of bright yellows, whites and blacks are evident in most of his work, and I believe because these colours link to uncomfortable dispositions, I base this argument on his own self-isolation due to the hostile environment of Europe at the time. The image itself presents a dreamlike scenario where a naked woman lays on a carpet and behind her stands an anthropomorphic leopard with a torch. In the far right you can see a figure in a doorway who also holds a torch. Since Beckmann loved to use symbolism in his work, this is definitely a solid example of him using it to effect. With Beckmann's depictions, this is a self-reflection of a world he fears draws near. Also, the startling quick brushstrokes have a defined presence on the canvas, which I think is fantastic. While residing in Amsterdam, Beckmann was in a metaphorical spiderweb, and unfortunately for him, he was the fly. The quote, "degenerate art community," a term which was adopted by the Third Reich, was a form of ethics which deemed artwork in this style to be communist, Jewish, gypsy or un-German. The exhibition included artists such as Max Ernst, Wassily Kandinsky, Paul Klee. Beckmann, like many others living through the Second World War, was horrified with the status of Germany's politics, and it deeply affected his later opportunities, but he persevered with his art. In conclusion, my knowledge into the subject of abstract expressionism has progressed to a level where I'm completely obsessed. At the start of this assignment I was going to discuss an artist that I already looked at, but having considered other possibilities, I adamantly state that Max Beckmann has now become one of my favourite artists. The sincere level of talent, originality and overall masterful presentation creates no doubt in my mind that he was an artist who challenged expectations, rose to courage in one of humanity's greatest disasters, and stood by his own ethics, which is admirable in most scenarios. The man served through the First World War and he suffered through the Second, and both experiences became part of his work. I think when I continue to produce artwork of my own, I'll know that Beckmann is another influence. The image on the right is a painting I made in the fall of last year entitled Short on Change. Upon deciding on the specific image, method of technique and overall aesthetic, it becomes apparent that symbolism and emotion are crucial. Looking further into the expressionist movement, it's hard to distinguish certain artists from others, but I believe experiments to the medium have to alter the viewer's perspective. It's fascinating to see that we always look for a sense of humanity within art, and so the artist attempts to do so through their own experiences, dreams and ideals. While making this painting, I had trouble with employment, dealing with serious decisions in life and the link between reality and unconsciousness. I believe Beckmann and I share a similar approach to style, and this is because we both use dreams as a primary tool for our art. Listed below are a number of the references I used in this essay. And that concludes today's video. Thanks a lot for you guys watching. I really appreciate it. If you could like and subscribe and share, I'd really appreciate that. See you guys soon.